for our audience with visual disabilities. This conversation is taking place between two people over video conference. At left is a man with a beard, Mustafa Rfat, and at right is a woman, Dr. Olivia. Mr. Rfat is sitting in front of an artificial mountain lake background, while Dr. Olivia is in front of an artificial office background.
Welcome to AIR4VR Counselors. I'm Dr. Olivia. Thank you for joining us. Today, we are joined by Mustafa Rfat. Mustafa is a graduate student and a trainee at the Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental Disabilities at West Virginia University. He is a passionate advocate for equal rights for people with disabilities. Mustafa came to the United States as a refugee from Iraq in 2011. He currently has a master's degree in social work from West Virginia University and is actively pursuing a master's degree in public administration. In addition, Mustafa has recently been admitted to a doctoral program in social work at Washington University in St. Louis. Congratulations on that. His research focuses on refugees with disabilities, access to education and training. Mustafa, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on. I'm very excited to start this discussion.
Yeah, and again, congratulations on all of your success. You're wrapping up your master's degree and then transitioning on to your doctoral studies. So early congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
So first, let's begin by you telling us about how did you develop your research interests?
Yes, so my research really started from a personal experience. As you mentioned, I came to United States as a refugee from Iraq. And during my refugee period in northern Turkey, I become an interpreter because I speak different languages. And that was my first observation of the challenges of refugees with disabilities. As I was helping them get their paperwork done, I realized that refugees with disabilities have very hard time in meeting the definition of well-founded fear, and because people with mental issues, with intellectual disabilities have really hard time in explaining what fear means and recalling their traumatic experiences. So that was a very heartbreaking for me, and I try to advocate for them to have equal access to to gain the refugee status.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then after that period, I was like, if I get accepted to any country, I will devote my time to help people with disabilities, refugees. So yeah, I got the chance to start my bachelor's degree at West Virginia University in social work. I focused on mental health, on disability issues. Um, yeah, and that's how I become very interested in this topic.
Yeah. And I think you just shared something very interesting because I myself and my family came to the US as refugees as well. And that is a component that being a refugee, didn't even take into account how depending was somebody's ability to articulate their experience, how that can impact their ability to then, move and transition to another country. How critical that aspect of it is, because I know how strenuous that process is to get a refugee status. So having that being an added piece, how that can be a barrier to a lot of people if the people involved in the refugee status process do not take that into account. So that just brought an awareness to me, and I have a firsthand experience as a refugee. So that is very, very interesting. So what of kind of continue to talk about the unique experiences of refugees. what would you want vocational rehab counselors to know if they're having the opportunity to work with not only refugees, but refugees specifically with disabilities?
Yeah, so I think I would like to go a little back to the refugee experience in camp.
Mhm.
So I read in a statistic, and I think it was like out of 25 million refugees, almost 10 million of them reported having disabilities.
Mhm.
So think about the disability prevalence among refugees.
Mhm.
And we already know having the refugee status, how challenging that is. And when you add the disability piece on it, it makes it really, really hard. Um, so when um, um, so before you resettle in a country, you get to do like an orientation, and that orientation they teach you about the things you are going to be doing in the host nations. And throughout my research, I found that unfortunately, in these cultural orientations, there is nothing about disability resources.
Mhm.
Because I remember as a refugee with disabilities, the only thing that I was hearing while I was in a refugee camp is that, okay, when you get to resettle, you will be like getting some help from the government, and that's how you're going to live your life. And as a young man, that was a very hard to accept it. I was
Mhm.
very passionate to go back to college, to, pursue a career, to like help others. So as you can see, that disparity starts from the beginning.
Mhm.
And when you move to, for example, I came to United States, obviously one of the challenges I had was they don't accept your previous credential in the United States. So I have a teaching background, and when I applied for a college, they were like, "We are sorry, but we cannot accept your degree from Iraq." So at that point, I lost like 4 or 5 years of my life.
Yeah.
Beside that, the, the the disability piece was I have a physical disability, so um, I had a hard time in understanding what resources are available for me.
Mhm.
As you know, like when refugees come to a new country, it's hard for them um, to know the services that are available for them. Like
Yeah.
back in Iraq, we don't have services like rehabilitation services. So that helps you get education, get training, and become independent, become self-sufficient. Um, and I think that's a very important piece to know for a provider, that their clients are not aware that there is services available for them. And also, an important piece, I think, is the policies that we have, especially at the rehabilitation services, is not inclusive. At least from my experience, I can say that. I remember when I applied for a scholarship through a disability organization, they required me to take a test to be eligible for the scholarship,
Mhm.
and I agreed. So while I was taking the test, I realized that many of the questions that they were asking was designed for someone who lived in the United States for a long time, who finished high school in the United States, who is
Mhm.
familiar with the culture. And as someone who was resettled for 2, 3 years, it was hard for me to know it.
Mhm.
And uh, as I left the test that day, I was very disappointed. I knew I failed the test,
Mhm.
but I was like, there must be something that I can do to help my counselor understand my situation. That this test was not designed for refugees
Yeah.
with disabilities. So I asked my friend who was in college at that time to give me a word that every college student should know it. So he gave me a word, I think it was in biology. And after 10 days, I went to get the result of the test. And I told my counselor, please don't tell me the result of my test because I know I failed it. And so I told her, I'm going to give you a very short test. If you know my test, I will just walk out. I don't need any help from you. But if you fail my test, you need to at least give me a chance. You need to support me at least for one semester to see if I'm able to do college. So I told her that I'm going to give you a word. If you can spell it, if you know the meaning, then you pass my test.
Okay.
And if you fail it, then we need to start different discussion. So I told her the word, and she couldn't spell it. She couldn't tell me the meaning. I just want to make it clear. My goal was not to embarrass her.
Mm-hmm.
My goal was to help her understand that, hey, you went to college in the United States. You have a master's degree. You were exposed to this word, and yet you see like you couldn't recall it. But how for someone like me who was not exposed to the knowledge, to the experiences that you asked me when you did this test, how you expect me to know it?
Mm-hmm.
So my social worker was very kind, and she was like, you have a very valid point. And she consulted with her supervisor, and they were like, Mustafa, we are going to give you a chance to go to college for one semester. If you pass it, then we'll continue helping you.
Yeah.
Guess what? In my first semester, my GPA was like 3.6, and I finished my bachelor's with a recognition of cum laude. I forgot this award,
Oh,
but
come on. Okay, with honors, you basically graduated with honors.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and you can see like our policies really does not reflect that the true values, the true culture, the true population we have.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think that's something very important for the counselor at the VR to know.
Yeah. So I think you're bringing in so many different factors, right? So basically, from what I heard from your own personal experience, is the limitation around that cultural consideration and cultural competency within the VR community. Because of personally, when you look at the mental health world, I do feel that the disability services are a lot more inclusive than other spaces, right? Because you are working with, with accommodation is literally what you do. But I have become more and more aware that there is still that culture piece that sometimes is a miss. So we're very conscientious about just like the disabilities that we're working with, but not always the cultural context in which the person is coming from. So if we're talking about, even socioeconomic status, how that's going to look different if somebody has a disability and they're coming from a privileged background as far as like socioeconomic status, or coming from a marginalized community, coming from a single parent. And now for you, you're talking specifically, somebody who is coming assimilated into a new culture, and how some of the practices around accessing additional services at this moment are not taking those cultural contexts into consideration. And I see how now I understand why you're pursuing a doctoral degree, because that was such an amazing like thing that you were able to put together that really brought up a valid point for your VR counselor there. So I'm really happy to hear that, one, you were so proactive in advocating for yourself, and then you also were teaching your VR counselor, some cultural considerations there, like, hey, let's kind of let's consider a couple of things, and let's look at me specifically and see how limiting some of these things are. This could have potentially kept you from being able to be where you are now. So thank you for sharing that. And kudos to you again for being such a strong advocate for yourself, that has led you to being where you are now, about to go into a doctoral program. So with that, what are some of the strategies that you will recommend for VR counselors to, when working with refugees with disabilities? What are some like tangible things that they can start doing now to be more inclusive when working with this population?
Yes. So I think, like the previous administration really dismantled refugee program in the United States. And what that did is that right now, refugee resettlement agencies are really not able to effectively help refugees, especially refugees with disabilities who need more help in their early period, in that first 2 years,
Mhm.
because their funding was cut, they had to be closed, they had a lot of issues. And I think what the rehabilitation services and other social programs need to do is reach out to the refugee resettlement agencies and just brainstorms like how refugee resettlement agencies can refer refugees with disabilities, after they help them, they refer them to social services, specifically rehabilitation services, to help them with education, to help them with training. Um, Unfortunately, because the refugee agencies, they don't have that many staff that they can spend much time with refugees with disabilities. So what happened is that refugees with disabilities get their like most of them like try to apply for SSI or other like social programs, and after that they just like fall in this gap where they don't know what's next for them.
Mm.
They don't know if there is other disability services available for them to help them with their education, to help them with other social services. And when rehabilitation services fill this gap,
Mm.
then after like 1 year or 2 years, when the resettlement agencies help refugees get completely resettled, then they can access rehabilitation services immediately, instead of like waiting years and years and years to trying to find these services by their own,
Mm.
because of the language barrier, because of the bureaucratic systems we have, because of the because of the health issues that many parents with many refugee parents experience when they resettle, that really discourage them to like seek additional help if they have a child with disabilities. So or even if they are themselves disabled. So I think that's what you know rehabilitation services can do to effectively help this vulnerable group.
Yeah, I like the suggestion about collaboration, right? Because I think sometimes we can start feeling overwhelmed, like, oh my goodness, I have to do something more. I have to create something more, where really you're saying create a working alliance between the VR professionals and refugee services to really figure out, okay, how can we make this transition as seamless as possible? And like you mentioned, so that we don't have so many people falling into those gaps because they're not aware of the services that are available there. And again, I think this is going back to me. I'm seeing this trend about again, this cultural context, because if I'm coming from a background where disability services was not a thing or it was very limited, I'm not going to know what to ask, right? I'm not going to know, even when I'm going through my initial, like going through the refugee services, to ask like, hey, what are some of these services? How can I get access to these services for myself, for my children, for my family members, because you just don't know that it's available. So I really love that recommendation to create an alliance, so that way the VR services are in communication with the refugee resettlement programs to make sure that they're providing the language and the context. Because again, I really do understand the piece about just not knowing. If you don't know, you're not going to seek it out. And then, like you mentioned, years passed before you realize that there were actually services available that could have been supporting you this entire time. So I'm all about collaboration. So I love that recommendation. The next question that we have for you is, what can VR counselors do then to maximize VR services when working with refugees with disabilities, specifically youth, right? Because like our focus with our project is around youth. So when thinking about the different VR services that are available, how can VR counselors like really maximize the benefits of what they have to offer when working with young people who are also refugees, who also have disabilities?
Yes. So I think there are several things. I mean, first of all, like as I mentioned earlier, like look at the policies we have. Are they inclusive? Do they have, does our services have language plan? Because we know when refugees resettle, they usually have language issues. Do we have a language plan that makes it easy for refugees with disabilities to communicate with us? Do we have like community outreach where refugees are more likely to socialize or to be like the mosques, church, other recreational places? You know, we need to like reach out to these places and tell them about the services we have. Um, you know, like the that diversity, especially among refugees, it's really not one size fits all. So we really have to think, um, you know, we need to make sure that the services we are providing is culturally sensitive, does reflect the values and the perceptions of refugees, you know, especially refugees with disabilities.
I love that. Again, the theme today, I feel, is like that cultural sensitivity in making sure that we're really being inclusive. And I also think the added layer, right, when you think about, I can also see there being a need for education around refugee experience and what does it mean for somebody to be a refugee? Because if you're coming from the traumas that we come with, makes it very hard to trust people, especially anything that has to deal with anybody's government. And so I can see, even if you're talking about youth specifically, how some parents could be hesitant to get their kids involved in a system that they're not familiar with. So understanding that that initial hesitation or struggle to buy in, even once they sign up for a program, might not be that they don't like you, they just don't trust, rightfully so. Because if I'm dealing with trauma, I'm adjusting, I'm getting accustomed to a new culture, a new way of life. Now I'm having to, meet new people. And as you mentioned, there's that language barrier potentially. And now you're talking about my babies, like there could be some potential hesitation to just get involved, just because you don't know, and the fear. of just still working through that trauma that you've experienced.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah, I think this work is going to be even more important as the current administration, presidential administration is promised to increase the number of refugees accepted in the United States. So that means we're going to see more refugees in our community. So I think, you know, this work is going to be very important.
Exactly. Any final words or thoughts to leave our listeners with, just from either personal experience or just a professional recommendation that you have for them?
Well, I mean, I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart to include, you included the refugees with disabilities, because often this group is just very underserved. And I think, like, as a providers, we have really ethical obligations to make sure that we are including everyone in this process. And as we know, economic stability is such an important factor that determines someone's future, especially their future health, their future, their integration to our society. We are opening a space for them even to contribute back to society. So I think the rehabilitation service is such an important place for refugees to be familiar with, to get access early on, because this is how we can ensure that like we are helping everyone in our society.
Most definitely. And thank you for taking the time to come and speak with us about such an important topic. And I'm very excited for the future work that you will be doing as you transition into your doctoral program. I think your passion, rooted in your own personal experience, is going to make a world of difference for this unique population. So thank you for the work that you're already doing and the future work that I know you're going to do, continue to do in the future. So again, thank you for joining us, and we appreciate everything that you shared today.
Oh, you are more than welcome. Thank you for having me on.
Okay.